Good afternoon, everyone. I think we're going to go ahead and start to be mindful of everyone's time. My name is Paul C. Taylor, and I'm one of the faculty directors of the Grand Challenge Initiative on Racial Justice and the Third Reconstruction. In that capacity, I represent a group of Vanderbilt faculty who've come together with generous support from the College of Arts and Science to highlight and develop the college's scholarly resources for engaging questions of racial justice. Two broad questions frame our project. First, what does the persistence of racial injustice mean for social life? And second, what will it take to finish the work of Reconstruction? In support of this broader project, we partnered with the Millions of Conversations group to produce a series of racial justice teachouts. Each of these events is devoted to a particular racial justice issue, and it has been a privilege and a joy to work with the Millions team to bring them to fruition. I'm grateful for the opportunity to put Vanderbilt scholars in conversation with the members of our wider communities. We look forward to learning from our guests and audiences on these topics, and we hope to keep thinking with them about the paths forward. I'll invite you to monitor the Millions of Conversations social media streams for more information about future events. For now, I'll close this introduction with a few words of well-deserved thanks. I owe a special thanks to John Guerrier, Dean of the College of Arts and Science, and to Summer Ali, founding president and CEO of Millions of Conversations. Without their moral and material support, this partnership would have been impossible. Rimzia Suleiman, the Chief Operations Officer at Millions, has, along with Elise Burns, Cameron Foster, and the rest of the Millions team, provided invaluable help and guidance in organizing our events. Finally, on the Vanderbilt side, postdoctoral fellow Eric Ritter has been a steady and expert showrunner, holding everything together and setting the table for our esteemed speakers, while Professor Rebecca Van Diver has made invaluable contributions to our planning. And that brings us to our main event. I'm grateful to our eminent speakers for consenting to join us today to share a little wisdom with us and for helping to plan and frame this discussion. And I'm grateful to Professor Brandon Byrd for helping to plan and frame the discussion and agreeing to moderate. With that, I'll turn the proceedings over to Professor Byrd to introduce our speakers and to kick things off. Thanks very much and welcome.
Thanks so much, Paul. Good morning, everybody. Bonjour tout le monde. I am Professor Brandon Byrd. I am Associate Professor of History at Vanderbilt University. Today, I'm absolutely thrilled and honored to moderate our discussion today. This discussion is entitled Haiti in the U.S., Political Past, Presents, and Futures. And this discussion will focus on the current crises in Haiti and its impacts on Haitians and Haitian Americans. We'll ask how we got to the current crises and also where we might go from here. This discussion, of course, brings together eminent speakers who I'll introduce in a second, and also audience members who are more than welcome, in fact, encouraged to join this conversation. You simply put questions, comments, thoughts right here in the chat, and we will be more than happy to engage those. Without further ado, let me introduce our panelists today. First off, we have Joseph Guerrier. He's the co-founder and director of public engagement of Tennessee Haitian Voices. He's a talk show host, community organizer, and social advocate focused on bringing community together, regardless of faith, race, sexual orientation, nationality, or age. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for
having me.
We also
have Dr. Karla McKanders, who is a clinical professor of law and associate director of the legal clinic at Vanderbilt Law School. She also directs the Immigration Practice Clinic, where her students provide legal representation on humanitarian immigration crises before administrative agencies. She is a scholar of immigration, race, and the administrative state. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
So again, without further ado, I want to jump right in to our conversation. Not directed to any either of our panelists in particular, welcoming them both to jump in as they see fit. Off the bat, I want us to really ground ourselves in thinking about what do we mean by the current crises? What do you see in your estimation to be the current crises facing Haiti and Haitians?
I can go first.
Please do.
Okay. Well, again, thank you for having me. Not only having me, thank you for this invitation. especially for anything related to Haiti. And I'm honored to be here and to talk about what's going on in Haiti right now and how we get there. So as you know, I'm from Haiti, born and raised in Haiti, even though I left Haiti almost about 30 years ago. But my heart is still in Haiti. How we get there, it's a long story. And before we start, as anything related to Haiti, if you allow me, I will play this two-minute video. So for you guys to help better understand what's going on.
The first country in the Western Hemisphere to abolish slavery, a country consistently targeted by violent, anti-democratic, racist US policy ever since. Why don't we ever talk about the support that Ronald Reagan offered to the brutal dictatorship of Baby Doc, or how George H.W. Bush and the CIA unleashed murderous death squads in an effort to stop the democratic election of Jean-Bertrand Aristide, only to facilitate his overthrow in a brutal coup after Aristide won. Why don't we talk about how Bill Clinton would only allow Aristide to return to Haiti if he agreed not to seek re-election, or the inhumane way that Clinton treated Haitians fleeing the country and warehoused them at the Guantanamo prison in appalling conditions. And that's almost a decade before Bush turned it into an illegal gulag for suspected terrorists.
When the United States decided that if necessary, we would use force to remove the military regime and to restore President Aristide and democracy, I was so determined that no one would think we were trying to revive any hemispheric imperialism.
Why don't we discuss the George W. Bush administration, once again supporting the overthrow of Haiti's democratically elected government in 2004, or the neoliberal economic policies pushed by Clinton Global and the Obama administration, or the story of how President Obama backed a corrupt government in Haiti as it used anti-democratic tactics in an effort to keep power.
It's a great pleasure to welcome President Martelly of Haiti to the Oval Office. Our two countries really brought about the trend towards independence in the Western Hemisphere.
No Democrats or Republicans ever want to talk about this history. Yes, Donald Trump is a racist, a horrid, overt, shameless racist. But let's be honest, US policy toward Haiti has always been racist. Trump should be condemned for what he said, but so too should all US presidents going back well over a century who have ravaged Haiti in defense of corporate profits and the elite. On Martin Luther King Day, MSNBC repeatedly played this clip of Ronald Reagan denouncing the use of racial epithets, and he did it in a speech on Dr. King's birthday. And MSNBC contrasted that to Trump's shithole comments.
As recent unfortunate events have demonstrated, we cannot be complacent about racism and bigotry. And I would challenge all of you to pledge yourselves to building an America where incidents of racial hatred do not happen because racism has.
All right. So this is how we get there.
I guess the follow up on that is that I am an immigration attorney, and I think what Joseph points out in the audio is that immigration policy is directly connected to foreign policy. And the immigration is a system that's controlled by our political branches. It's, our immigration courts are run by the Department of Justice. Their boss is the Attorney General. The Department of Homeland Security is a political entity that's appointed by the president. And so the policies that you heard in that video directly influence the immigration laws. And so, as a humanitarian immigration attorney, for the past 20 years have represented foreign nationals in immigration court. And what is apparent is that, being granted refugee status is not necessarily connected with whether you can, establish that you have a fear of returning to your country of origin based upon your political opinion, based upon your nationality. It is deeply connected to US policies. And those policies have, over history, have excluded Haitian nationals from being, called or labeled legally refugees. And so you have in our immigration court system, based upon where you're located, Florida, Atlanta, if you look at the grant rates for asylum for Haitian nationals, it will be almost zero because, again, it's related to policies. And if you fast forward to today, you have Title 42, which is a provision of the health code that was first put in place by the Trump administration to block all foreign nationals entering on the southern border. This policy is still in place by the Biden administration. And what we saw at the Del Rio border was that Haitian nationals were blocked from entering the country, and the Biden administration was using Title 42 to selectively admit certain individuals and allow them to seek asylum in the United States, but deporting Haitian nationals back to an unsafe country, a unstable country. And so you see, one thing that the audio pointed out is that each administration has had the same policies towards Haiti. Also, we can see in the immigration context that over time, whether we're looking from the disparate treatment of Cuban nationals versus Haitian nationals in the Cuban Refugee Adjustment Act, and not the same policies not being applied to Haitian nationals, or if we fast forward to today and we see the disparate treatment, the stalling in according or updating temporary protected status for Haitian nationals to allow them to stay in the country. And so each administration, on immigration law has, very disparate policies. And I think the thing that undergirds those policies, which Mr. Guerrier pointed out, is that systemic racism is a driving factor in the way that immigration policies are set.
And I'm glad that you mentioned that, because the reason why I always play this audio, just to give the audience an overview in how we get there, where it doesn't matter whether or not you have a Democrat in the White House or either you have a Republican. This policy remain the same, and it's still the same. Because if we go back to when Haiti get the independence from France, it was until 1862, United States recognized Haiti independence. So this is not something new. This is something that happened almost over centuries ago. So you got to understand exactly, and this is one thing I always try to mention whenever that I'm part of this panel, where each time that you probably tired of hearing it, the main intro where Haiti always called the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. But what mainstream media never actually saying that, never give no context as to why Haiti found itself in this situation.
And I think that's extremely important, the context, especially when we, as an immigration attorney that litigates cases with my students, we always bring the historical context into the courtroom to understand why the individual that is standing before the judge is seeking asylum, is seeking relief. And oftentimes, again, there are norms that pervade immigration court that prevent someone from being able to seek protection under the Refugee Convention. And as Mr. Guerrier mentioned, no matter what administration, Obama was known as the deporter in chief. He deported more individuals from non-citizens from the United States than any other president. He focused specifically on, his slogan was felons, not families. And that policy specifically had an impact on immigrants of African descent. And so one thing that most people don't consider is that even if you have, your green card or lawful permanent resident status, you can be removed from the United States if you engage in certain conduct or if you are convicted of a crime. And that has, under the Obama administration, his policies on felons, not families, increased the deportation of Black immigrants. And also, under the Trump administration, those numbers, almost increased by 200% based upon the policy. So here again, we see, and we saw the Biden administration in the first month that they were in power, deported Haitian children back to Haiti. And so we see that each administration has, there's no good record on immigration when we look at who's in office, who's holding office.
And just to add a couple words, just like 2 weeks ago, on the 10th-year anniversary of the Haitian earthquake, there was about 4 airplanes loaded with Haitians deported back to Haiti. Just to tell you that, it doesn't matter who is in Washington, this policy remains the same. And as Professor Karla just mentioned, the old Title 42 that was used under Trump is still active as of today. They're still using it to deport all those Haitians. Perfect example, one of those Haitians coming from Chile last summer. And you guys probably see those videos. There was mistreating Haitian. And as a result, we do everything possible so we could stop those deportation. As a result, they end up clean the under bridge. We have no idea what happened to those Haitians. When you call some number they give us to see whether or not we can help some of those Haitians, we still cannot. We were able just to get like between about 8 to 10 families here in Nashville, Tennessee, but we still have a long way to go. So as a result, just to be mindful of the situation, as I mentioned earlier, doesn't matter who's in Washington, the policy against Haiti is dated back over 100 years and still continue as of today.
Mm-hmm. And that policy, definitely, if you look at our country's immigration policy, somebody put in the chat that do we believe wealth is a criterion for admission of immigrants? And this goes back to, the 1920s, where we had a quota system based upon geographic location. And that quota system privileged immigrants coming from, Western Europe. You can still see that today. For example, if I am going to try to seek asylum in the United States, if I am from a country in which I can get a visa, a tourist visa, very easily to come to the United States, I can come to the United States, and when I'm inside of the United States, not in deportation proceedings, I will be able to file an application for asylum and have a non-adversarial proceeding before an asylum officer. And if you contrast that with Haitian nationals who are at the border, mainly at the southern border, that do not have the means to get a tourist visa to get into the United States, they, prior to, throughout the previous administration, the Obama administration, there were, Haitian nationals who were at the southern border. I took students down to Tijuana, and I guess what we normally hear is are immigrants coming from Central America and in the Northern Triangle countries. But there is a significant population of Haitian nationals at the border, and they do not have the same privilege of entering and coming into the United States and seeking asylum, like if you were coming in on a tourist visa. They are, placed in a detention facility. Often those detention facilities, the attorneys don't have access to Creole interpreters to talk to Haitians that are detained at the border. Also, you do not get that non-adversarial proceeding you have to go through deportation proceedings. You have to ask to be released into the United States. Also, the Migration Protection Protocols, also known as the Remain in Mexico policy, through the Trump administration, which through a court order is still in place with the Biden administration, means that Haitian nationals who are seeking asylum at the border have to remain in Mexico while they wait to go before an immigration judge on their proceedings. And so that question is, on the selective admission of immigrants is readily visible in the ways in which Haitian nationals seek asylum in the United States and the multiple barriers that they face, especially with the Trump administration's Title 42 policies, and especially with the Remain in Mexico policy, which puts Haitian nationals at a significant disadvantage in seeking humanitarian relief.
Wow, and y'all just laid it out beautifully, clearly, compellingly, in a way that is making my job as moderator incredibly easy. So I appreciate it. So if we're to understand, and we have to understand, if the current crises facing Haiti and Haitians are the crises of insecurity, in Haiti of fuel shortages and of poverty. If we understand the condition to be insecurity, even in the diaspora, insecurity even of status, right? The risk of deportation, not even the risk, the reality, the looming threat. If we understand it to be, stigmatization, right? And we heard that, and the comments from Trump, but even in the practices that we laid out, we see those stigmas. One question that I would appreciate y'all's thoughts on, and it's a question that for my students is it's one that I encourage us to think deeply about, is the sort of the why, right? So I think very clearly, again, like from the period of non-recognition, right, for most of the 19th century, 6 decades after Haiti establishes independence, into the 20th century, through the devastating US occupation of Haiti, right, from 1915 to 1934, to the economic domination that persists afterwards, to the persistence of US support for dictatorship in Haiti, right, to the unequal treatment of Haitian refugees, especially you consider vis-a-vis the treatment of folks like Cuban, quote unquote, exiles, right? Why do we see this persistent, disproportionate, unequal treatment of Haiti and Haitians, right? Appreciating that race is a central factor, right? With Haiti being, a historic Black state and the first anti-slavery state. Why are there other reasons, other factors, right, for the racialized immigration policies, right, for the exploitation of Haiti, right? Can you help us understand why?
I think you have to look back at the foundation of America's United States immigration policies. It goes back to the first naturalization law of 1790, which limited naturalization, the ability to become a citizen, to free white males. You also have Supreme Court justices through, Dred Scott versus Sanford saying that, Black Americans in the United States have no rights to which the white man is bound to respect. That's Justice Taney from Dred Scott. And so you see that initial, racism permeating immigration policies, and it, that foundation is, goes throughout immigration policies up until the present day. And so I think that the disparate application of the Refugee Convention, the disparate application of, the ability to apply temporary protected status, which allows individuals to stay in the United States when there is a natural disaster, when there is civil strife. You saw both the Trump administration saying, no, we will not give temporary protected status to Haitian nationals, And then you saw the Biden administration hesitating to update the date on which Haitian nationals will qualify. And I, would state that you have to really look back at America's history, that our immigration laws kind of mirror the American project to keep, the United States, white, and to exclude, Black and brown non-citizens from the United States.
And if I could add, if we go back in the 19th century, by the time Haiti got its independence, Haiti was a threat to the existing world, because even under President Thomas Jefferson worked to isolate Haiti and strangle Haiti economy, because they don't want slaves here in the United States know that Haiti was a free country. So this is not something that happened today. And that's the reason why I keep going back to give context as to what's going on right now. You have a relationship to what happened back then, and then follow up with multiple president after president as they continue the same racist policy toward Haiti. So if Haiti was a threat then, they still continue to see Haiti as a threat, as a reason why still, as we speak right now, even though that we heard all the time that United States will let Haiti decide, but no, it has not been. Because if we go back to 1986, when the Haitian people will vote against the dictatorship of Baby Doc, and United States has been part of their conversation since day one. They handpick whoever they want to govern Haiti, and whoever they govern Haiti, if it's not their pick, they will do everything in their power to overthrow it. Perfect example: when Haiti got elected, when former President Jean-Bertrand Aristide got elected in Haiti, probably in 1991. And the fact that his policy were toward the poor, and the United States cannot take it, where somebody will challenge it, not challenge the United States, and also challenge France, because all you want to do, you want to make sure that $22 to $25 billion we pay France to be recognized for our independence. It was asking for, and they don't like that conversation. And that's the reason why 8 months in power, they overthrew him. And he was in exile for almost 3 years until the Clinton administration brought him back to Haiti. He got elected again in 2004. Same thing happened under George Bush, where they sent him to Africa. And it was about the same conversation, where they don't want Haiti to prosper, because Haiti being prosper, it will be a threat to the United States, because they want to make sure they keep Haiti where it is right now. And that's the reason why, if you follow the news, each time that something happened to French Martinique and Guadeloupe, they want to get the independence. The first thing the French government tell them, see, look what happened to Haiti over there. I don't think you want to put yourself in that situation.
That's right. Yep. So I wonder, as we talk about these crises, these manufactured crises, as we understand the roots and the role that, and we focus on the United States, but Mr. Guerrier, I like how you also center France in this conversation, particularly with the indemnity, that France, that Canada, that the United Nations, that they are not exempt from this conversation either. So as we talk, right. As we talk about these manufactured crises, I wonder, from y'all's respective experiences, if you could help us put, maybe some faces, maybe not names, right? But maybe some faces to this. What does it look like, from the perspective of somebody who has worked with refugees and immigrants? What does it look like, Mr. Guerrier, who's embedded, who is part of the Haitian community here? Like, what is? Can we put a face to this, and what this looks like on a human level?
I mean, for our community, we it's a struggle every day because we want to see Haiti prosper. We want to see progress, but each time that the Haitian people make a step forward, they make 4 steps backward. And each time that happens, it will force us to go back again to rethink, okay, what's going on? Who involved? What needs to be happening? And if you look at what now, the current crisis in Haiti right now, the country being pretty much like, I don't even know how to describe it, because ever since the assassination of the former Haitian president, Jovenel Moïse, so now the country is governed by handpicked prime minister by United States. And not to like last week, France, Canada, United States, I believe some other country have a conference call to assure him that we got your back. So even though there were a resolution passed where they try to do, they try to come with a sense where they want to bring everybody to the table, bring all those political parties, religion, and the business sectors, I mean, pretty much the Haitian in general. But what the United States say, hey, we got your back. You don't have to go anywhere, regardless the resolution they pass. I want to stay in power until you think like, you know, everything is safe then to do election. But this is not what the population want. So it's frustrating, honestly, just in an outside looking, even though I have conversation with people in Haiti almost every day about what's going on in Haiti. But for us here, it's frustrating because it looks like, you know, we're a stepchild. And sometimes we will even ask ourselves, are we the 51st state of the United States? Because for whatever reason, we cannot do anything without even ask for permission. So this is the frustration.
What does it look like? I think on a human level, working with clients over the course of my career at the border, when you are working at the border, I took 2 students to the Tijuana border back in 2018. And when you wake up in the morning, individuals would go to the border. When you think or understand a system of seeking refugee status in the United States, even I, as a lawyer who practices in Tennessee, had the perception that you walk up to the border and you say, I want protection. Back in 2018, there were, people from Central America and a significant group of Haitian nationals at the Tijuana border. And what does the face of an individual look like? It looks like a pregnant woman standing at the border, and you have to get a number. And if your number is called on that day, you are taken by the Mexican immigration officials to the US border, and you request for the ability to come into the country. That can take, back then in 2018, that could take a significant period. You could be waiting for months at the border just to approach and ask for asylum. But the Trump administration's Remain in Mexico policy and the Biden administration has to continue to apply that policy by a court order. It looks the same. Individuals, what we have now are refugee camps. It looks like individuals living in refugee camps. And as you can imagine, there is, anti-Black racism in Mexico that's applied, to Haitian nationals, language barriers to get access to individuals, organizations to get help with your cases. If I'm detained in the United States as a Haitian national, what does the face of that look like? It looks like, again, not having the same access to attorneys to assist you on your cases. As an attorney, because of the language barrier, Some volunteer attorneys will not take on Creole-speaking cases because they cannot get an interpreter to help them with the case. You know, if I remain in detention, what does that look like? It looks like an individual, you know, I had a client who was moved from the border, moved to a detention facility in Georgia, and, you know, the immigration and customs officers refusing to get an interpreter when they were working with that individual. And if you can imagine being presented documentation in English and told to sign that and thinking that you were going to be deported back to your country, back to Haiti. And so that's, you know, what it looks like. What does it look like for someone who is being deported at the border? We saw the pictures in Del Rio. We also note that a range of nonprofit organizations and legal clinics have filed lawsuits about the ways in which Haitian nationals have been shackled on the deportation flights. And, you know, the overarching question is, if somebody is seeking refuge and seeking safety in the United States, why should they be shackled? Why should they be handcuffed? And why should they be placed on airplanes en masse? And so I think that, you know, from an immigration attorney's perspective, that's what it looks like, the face.
Thank you, Dr. McKanders. And you know, I want to take just a second just to point out the cruel irony in a lot of this and a lot of what we're discussing. You know, across the 19th century, Haiti, you know, beginning Alexander Pétion establishes the precedent of Haiti as free soil, right, as a refuge for enslaved people from elsewhere across the Americas, right? For African Americans, there's documentation of Jamaicans, right, seeking refuge there. Later administrations, it's not to romanticize the administrations of Jean-Pierre Boyer or of Nicolas Guerrier, but they also extend invitations that thousands and thousands of Black people from elsewhere in the Americas, including the United States, take up, and they go to Haiti, where they gain citizenship that, as has been laid out here, was denied in their own countries of birth. So there's just a real cruel irony to exactly these scenes that we see in these immigration policies that would deny Haitians that same right of refuge that their state long historically extended to others, right? But the question I want to ask here now is one that gets to a question in the chat from David Pierre-Louis. And that's about solutions and futures and who is involved in those, right? So I guess put simply, you know, from y'all's perspective, and the perspective of those that you're engaged with, that you're in community with, that you represent, what are the solutions and the futures that Haitians and that Haitian Americans are imagining in this moment? And also, what perhaps do you see as the role of U.S. citizens in the United States in achieving those futures and those solutions? And what is the role perhaps of the Haitian diaspora in achieving those desirable you know, futures and solutions?
I will pretty much, I mean, when I had this type of conversation with a friend or colleague as it relates to Haitian futures, we believe those of us in the United States or any other places around the world, we should play a role going forward as it relates to Haiti future. But the role we should play, it's a faced with obstacle because ever since Jean-Bertrand Aristide became president, one first thing he tried to do, he tried to actually do a do-over with the Haitian Constitution, because the way we draft where once you become a US citizen and you cannot engage or involve or either play any role in the Haitian government, you cannot run for office or anything whatsoever. And the way we try to do it, it will make sure that, even though that we're outside of Haiti and we supporting our family back in Haiti, we should play a role. And not only we should play a role, we should actually, if possible, run for office and have and grant dual citizenship. And again, those wealthy elites in Haiti didn't like the idea because they are the one pretty much will be the first group of people who are Black who will actually do everything possible to make sure this is not happening. And this has been going on for years, even though before the assassination of former Haitian President Jovenel Moïse. He was working on another draft of the Haitian Constitution to make sure the Haitian board, play a role in the future of Haiti. And what happened to him? The elite again pay millions of dollars to the Colombian to come to Haiti to assassinate him because he will fight for the poor. He will fight for people like me that if in case that if I have any dream just to go back to Haiti or involve in Haitian government, I could. But now we don't know what can we do. We want to get involved. We want to help. We want to Haiti see another day. Peacefully. But the current political crisis right now, it makes it hard to involve or to do anything possible.
I think my role as an attorney and what I do in teaching my students how to practice law is to engage in deep, active listening of the Haitian community. My students right now enrolled in the clinic are working with the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition to listen to what the needs are of the Haitian community, and then as lawyers, based upon that listening, provide options and responses to address, there are two different issues: individual lawyering, which is usually crisis lawyering for an individual who is in deportation proceedings, and then on a community level, listening to what the community wants, what the community needs, and how we can use our tools as lawyers to assist Haitian nationals. And that might be involved in doing a Know Your Rights presentation so that Haitian nationals who were released from detention and are in Nashville or the state of Tennessee have as much information as possible on what it means to go through the deportation process. And so, I think lawyers who engage in movement lawyering, our primary responsibility is to listen, learn, and then assist, be servants in terms of how we assist the Haitian community. And, on a national level, working with the Haitian Bridge Alliance has been some of the things that, I have been involved in to highlight, the needs of the Haitian community.
So Daniel Collins, they want to know were there any policies that we could point to that were productive or positive for U.S. Haitian relations, particularly as it relates to immigration. And I think we could even broaden that. Are there any moments, any precedents, maybe whether recent or historical, that we could point to possibly as, okay, this is possible, like this possible way forward. This is a possible precedent. There might, as I asked the question, I have to admit that I was struggling to think of one. But Dr. McKanders, Mr. Guerrier, you maybe you'll have a different response.
I think the most recent extending temporary protected status to Haitian nationals. And remember that I want to kind of clarify that temporary protected status, as the name states, is you get to remain in the United States, and it's not an immigration status that allows you to stay and become a lawful permanent resident. It allows, the US government will redesignate temporary protected status. But I think that can be one thing recently, the renewal of temporary protected status that is a U.S. policy from the Biden administration that is assisted Haitian nationals. We also can say, with the application of Title 42, that some Haitian nationals were allowed to come into the United States and seek asylum or have access to due process in immigration proceedings. And so, while there have been a significant number of Haitian nationals that were deported back, I think if we're looking for nuggets or little things that the U.S. has done recently, that can be something that we look at.
Mr. Guerrier, did you have any thoughts?
No.
On David Pierre-Louis' comment where he says, I think the solution is rooted in a bottom-up approach. We have to invest in intellectual infrastructure of the young folks, and we have to work to clear pathways for them to build the future they want and desire. I mean, thinking perhaps that, for me, even whether it's recent or historical, the instances where I see glimmers of hopes, where I see potential for real solidarities and potential for real sovereignty for Haitians has come from non-state actors, has come from not, certainly not the US government, but it has come from activists and intellectuals, oftentimes primarily within the broader African diaspora, working together to come through solutions that exist outside of the state structure that I think has been laid out here again in clear, compelling fashions, has really had no interest in the desires and aspirations that we've discussed here. David Pierre-Louis adds that seeking immigration status in another country only adds to the problem that is affecting us at the moment. We have to rebuild the compromised infrastructure. Migration has hurt us for far too long. Okay. I wonder what, in particular, Mr. Guerrier, I wonder what your thoughts are on that comment.
I mean, when you look at exactly the way the election won in Haiti, as reason why each year there's an election, you always heard the UN send election observer to observe the election, but at the same time, it's the UN with the United States who will handpick whoever they want to run the country. Perfect example, when Michel Martelly was running for president, that person, there was final three, and that person they want to run against Michel. I mean, the person they want to run against Michel Martelly, they feel that the person will win. Somewhat, they send former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton to Haiti to convince the other candidate to drop out of the race so they can handpick Michel Martelly to win that election. So anytime they can have somebody, they can do whatever they want, whatever they say, that's okay. But if anytime you try to elect it as somebody that's actually for the people and to care for the people issue, when it comes to infrastructure, when it comes to water, when it comes to water, when it comes to electricity, when it comes to transportation, they don't like anything like that. Perfect example, when the earthquake in 2010, the first country who actually came to Haiti to lend hand, it was Venezuela. And with Venezuela, and they grant us Haiti was enrolled in a program called Petro-Caribbean, which is give Haiti almost about $4 billion to help with Haitian build its infrastructure. And as a result, under Michel Martelly, still right now, I can name anything that happened to that money, and nobody hold accountable for that money. So this is where we are right now.
Yeah, I would agree that, you know, in terms of the structures, I would go back to those two different types of lawyering. There is lawyering for the individual who is usually in a moment of crisis in a detention facility, who is before an immigration judge, who needs, you know, representation. And I, you know, talk to my students about how in ways that type of lawyering is not transformational. Often you are arguing a case in front of a judge, you are trying to win that case. And sometimes that requires making arguments that are not aligned with the liberation of that person or that person's story. You're making a case to win and prevent someone from being deported. On the other hand, there's another type of lawyering, which is movement lawyering, or, you know, lawyering, we call it rebellious lawyering or critical lawyering, that seeks to change systems that are in place. And if we're looking at the immigration system, you know, sometimes there is not sometimes dissonance between, you know, arguing an individual case to help that person in crisis and reforming the systems and institutions that brought that person to that moment of crisis. And so, you know, I would definitely agree with David Pierre-Louis that immigration is not the answer. It is, you know, a tiny piece that we engage in, or I engage in as a lawyer, on two different levels that have an impact in different ways.
Great, thank you. I think we may have time to get to maybe one or two more questions. If any folks from the audience have any questions, have any thoughts, have any comments.
If we could go back to one good thing, it's not a good thing, but
Yeah.
I think it, you know, Justice Thurgood Marshall wrote an opinion in a case from the 1980s. It's John versus Nelson. And he, you know, made the argument calling for equal protection, the application of equal rights for Haitian immigrants, and to prevent the government from discriminating on the basis of race and national origin. Of course, it's a dissenting opinion. That's why I caveat it that it's not exactly good, but I think that, you know, the voices of dissent in, you know, Supreme Court opinions often point us towards, you know, a new reality that we should pay attention to. And so I think that while it's not something that's, you know, favorable, but I think it sets a roadmap for, you know, equal protection to be applicable to all immigrants. And in that case, it was Haitian immigrants.
And also, I think I see someone ask a question about whether or not those NGO having this. I cannot see the whole question, but I think it was something dealing with NGO. Just to be honest with you, really not. I can go back to 2010 after the earthquake. I don't know if you hear in the news where Red Cross was like $500 million. They only built 2 houses. And we pressed Congress just to bring these people to Washington to ask them actually what's going on with their money. Still right now, nobody has no idea what happened to that money. And that money is supposed to go to Haiti and help rebuild their country, and nothing happened. I went to Haiti 2 years after the earthquake. And when I went to Haiti, especially those areas where most damaged, some of those NGO that I've seen, they don't even get out of the car. All they do, running around, taking pictures, you know, taking videos, don't even talk to anybody. And when I went in some other places, I talked to those community leaders. I said, have these people talk to you or ask you what your needs are? And then like they were like, no. And then when you come here, and I asked one of those nonprofit that I know in Haiti, and I asked them, hey, can you guys give a report actually when last time you went to Haiti, what exactly you accomplished, what you've done? Nothing. And one thing I've been dealing with in Middle Tennessee, that anytime that I try to press this nonprofit about, you know, the role in Haiti, automatically, I'm just a threat. They don't want to talk about it. So no, those NGO pretty much, most of them, especially those going to church mission, they just go in Haiti and enjoy the nice beach, nice weather and things like that. They just go on vacation. That's in my opinion.
And David Pierre-Louis adds, and feel free, David, feel free to correct me if I'm misinterpreting or getting this wrong. Adds a bit of nuance, encourage us to think about that. It does matter what NGOs that we're talking about, what organizations we're talking about, that it is true that the vast majority of the funds promised by the US government, by international NGOs like the Red Cross, didn't see Haitian hands whatsoever. I think it's like 3%, the money total, right? Didn't. That there are some organizations that are engaged locally, organizations that are involving folks from the Haitian diaspora, local activists and organizers within Haiti. Haitian feminists have been particularly influential in building community-based organizations there. So it does matter to a certain extent, like if we are talking about which community organizations there are, to differentiate perhaps those from an entity like the Red Cross that I have no qualms with saying has been a root of far more problems than solutions.
Yes, David.
And David has also shared information about an organization that he's been involved with in the chat here. So folks are invited for sure to check that out.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I think we may be close to running out of time here. I welcome any from Dr. McKanders, Mr. Guerrier, any final comments to close us out?
I think that I think paying attention to the policies, the immigration policies that are being implemented is important, and understanding the foundations of how anti-Black racism in the United States impacts those immigration policies is extremely important. And also, seeking to volunteer and help and provide resources. Again, that's on a micro level, especially within the state of Tennessee and in Nashville, where resources to support immigrant communities often is very thin.
Yeah, I really don't have that much to say. Professor Karla already say everything. I'm just want to take this opportunity to thank you guys for having me in this panel. That's it. I enjoyed the conversation.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks to both of y'all. Thanks to our audience. Thanks to Dr. Paul Taylor. Thanks to Millions of Conversations for having us. I enjoyed it as well. So thank you. Merci un peu.
Merci.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.